Hello, welcome to Trends. I'd hope they're more verbose link to the note well, but if you've seen the note well by now, just assume this is the same one. So on our agenda, there's not much, just the 6962 bis, a brief talk about threat analysis, and nothing much has happened. So those are our items scheduled. Does anyone have any other items? Okay, so then let's continue. So the 6962 bis, we have 6 items left. You can see them at the bottom of the screen that we would like to resolve so that we can get this document out. So the first item is the document status. There's been some discussion on the list to change this from proposed standard to experimental. It seems that everybody is okay with experimental, but there was some pushback. So if there's anyone who wants to say something about this.
Yeah, Rich Salzakamai. Yeah, I think the major pushback against it was more about a process question, and there was question if there was support to do another round of experimentation. It seems that there is. So as long as there's consensus, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So who are you?
Yeah, exactly. Tim Albee, DigiCert. It's unfortunate. The nature of public certificates are that we have to do experiments on the public internet, and that's somewhat undesirable at times, but it's unavoidable in order to figure out how these things work at scale. There's no test environment you can use for the public internet. So,
yeah, to clarify, it's not that we're doing an experiment on this protocol. It's that the protocol itself, because it hasn't been implemented and tested, is an experimental state. So, we believe that there's a commitment to implement over the next few years, but just it's transitioning from the current format to the next format. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort. So
yeah, I completely agree with that comment. It's the only thing we can do. And yes, the new improvements we're making. The new improvements we're making are very important, and it's important that we get them out there.
So, do you guys run a CT log?
We do.
Can you say anything about transition plans? Is there anything that you could say?
We support the draft. We're working with Google. We were at their CT days. We work very closely with them, having the only other implementation other than theirs. And so, yeah, we're very supportive of this. We have internal desires to do even more exciting stuff with CT that I hope I'll be able to talk about in the future.
Hi, I'm Devin O'Brien from the Google Chrome team. So kind of piggybacking off of what Tim said, we actually do have plans to begin experimentation. I mean, right now our priorities have been bringing CT enforcement, and so that has taken our limited engineering resources and sort of funneled it towards there. But within the next probably 6 to 9 months, we're laying out our plans to do experimentation to sort of get hard data so that we can back up some of these aspects of 6962 bits. So it's on our roadmap. We don't exactly have that roadmap ready to share yet, but as soon as we do, we'll share it on list. But I just wanted to voice that this is absolutely something we stand behind, and we're going to be working on it. Just right now, not quite yet.
Okay, so the next item, and this came from Ecker. He's unfortunately not here, but he suggested to remove the preventing track and clients claim because it was a bit too strong. And it would cause problems with RSA PSS. So we've got a pull request for that, and the question is, does anyone object to this claim to be removed? Okay, so everybody seems okay with it. We hear no objections. We got a remote on, so let's see. Go ahead, Andrew.
Hey. Hi, I'm Andrew Ware. Though, yes, I do object to this change, and I did write onto the list to explain why I object. And the reason why I think there's been a misunderstanding, which is that using a deterministic signature scheme isn't the only way to achieve this. it's also possible to just sign a message like an STH just once, and then just store that signature and just return that signature for future requests for the STH. And I think this is important because we don't know yet exactly how gossip is going to work, and it might not be possible to deploy gossip experiments if there's a concern that that's going to lead to tracking. So this is the sort of thing which we could always, remove this requirement in the future. But if we don't have that requirement in now, then it could lead to trouble getting gossip experiments going. And I'm not the only one who has expressed an objection to removing this section. Tom Ritter and Linus Nordberg also chimed in on lists saying that they object to this.
So obviously this needs further discussion on the mailing list before resolution.
So then the next item also came from Acker's review is the no security implications claim. Fortunately, Acker's not here. Okay, sure. Okay. Okay, so meanwhile, so we'll skip this for now. Meanwhile, go to the other one. So there's another proposal to clarify what we mean by the current NTP time. There was some discussion, but I think since these are new items, I think we really need to be a little strict and say if someone doesn't give us text, then we have nothing to talk about, and so we will not continue with these items. So if anyone really feels strongly about this, they should actually volunteer to also provide the text. So does anyone here feel strongly about this? Any concerns on this? Like, do people don't care? Like, okay. Okay. So if it's not this important and we're pretty late in the process, then we're just not going to do anything with this. So we'll see if we can get voters to propose some text, and then maybe we'll see if it goes anywhere. But if there's not a strong participation, we're just going to drop it. So next item is the using JSON format for error reporting. I would hope we get a little more input on that item because we have implementers here.
Hi, Corey Bonnell, TrustWave. Obviously, I'm the one who proposed this. The idea here is that in Section 5, the actual response body that defines any additional error data is a should. There's no actual requirement for logs to actually return any data just besides the HTTP status code. My thought here was that if we use the JSON problem reporting format, logs can send back more metadata so that consumers of the log can basically automatically respond to any errors. One thing that came out of CT days is the potential some thoughts around rate limiting based on roots or intermediate CAs. If submitters to those logs could get more information back from the log operator, say like, you're being rate limited because you're intermediate here, and in the chains being currently rate limited, try back in 2,000 seconds or something like that. That information could be provided through this format. And what's nice here is that the JSON response format, it doesn't mandate that you support any extension metadata fields. So at a later date, if we decide that some CT log endpoint wants to go and return additional metadata, that can be done at a later date, maybe in like a further draft. This is kind of just laying the framework such that we have this error format defined now and we can leverage it later.
Okay, so are you willing to write up some text for this?
Yeah, sure. It's Corey again. Yeah, sure. I'll give it a shot.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, Tim Hallebeek. I'm assuming that, Corey, you're modifying a should here, right? So are you thinking that this is going to be a proposed format that we may change later, or I'm not sure I'd want to make it mandatory while it's still kind of half-baked, but I really like the idea of having a format that we can start experimenting with and returning error data, because one of the feedback that we do get from lots of the people who consume our logs is, in fact, that they get error response codes back and they have no idea what's going on and what they should do in response.
Corey from TrustWave again. So the JSON format is actually defined in RFC. I think it's 7807, and it defines in there how there's a couple standard fields in that JSON problem document, but it also allows for extensibility in the future. It basically says that if a client consuming that problem document sees a field that it doesn't understand, it must ignore it. So that's not treated as an error case if, at a later point we want to add some additional metadata.
All right, Tim Halbig. So your proposal would be you should report errors, and if you do, they must be in this RFC format?
Corey again for TrustWave. So yes, well, I think it'd be great if we could say must, like you return. So I believe from every endpoint defined in 6962 Beast, there are error codes and error messages defined. It would be nice that that they all come back in this problem document format.
Yeah, just because of the fact that it's kind of late and we haven't really played with this, I think I personally would prefer a should and should.
Corey again from TrustWave. So yeah, I mean, I guess if it is late in the game, and there's no provision to change this, I guess, maybe just remains a should.
Right. If we're talking about publication as an experimental standard, at some point in the future, if everything goes well, we're going to transition to a different standard status, and at that point, that's a new document. And if this turns out to work well, and it's and people like it, we can turn it into a must. But a should for now, it's reasonable.
Okay, now with the last item, I don't know where this came from. It just was it appeared on a list of items that were sent to the list, but I don't know who originated this, and I can't find any discussion of it. But the option for CT logs to signal when rejections were due to rate limiting. And again, we've got the same thing. If this is important, then we would need a volunteer to write text.
Tim Halbig, I would think that Corey's proposal covers that adequately.
That's actually true. You're right. Okay. Okay. Any other 6962 BIS items? No, so we're just sort of waiting on Ecker?
Yeah, he said 11:30. He was like after my tonight.
Oh, okay. So we'll skip those items for now. So let's go back to the trans threat analysis. So this has been mostly a work of Steve Kent, and in the last about 3 IETF meetings, I think we see, small updates every 4 months, and 2 people mostly arguing about what it should be, and most other people not caring anymore what happens to this document. So we really don't want to keep the working group open for just this document. So we're sort of pondering what to do here. There doesn't seem to be that much interest. The document is pretty far finished, so it's also a waste of it if it doesn't get finished. But we really don't want to have more infighting between 2 people and just waiting forever on this.
Yeah, I think the one way to frame the question is the value of the document greater than the cost of getting it closed? And at this point, right, and at this point, we're just not seeing a lot of interest in the document, right? And it's hard to know if it's that people have lost their taste for discussion of it, and that they really do care, or that they just don't care. Or I should say, you just don't care. So.
Rich Sauls Akamai. Well, it's got like the same level of interest that the rest of trans and gossip has these days, I would say. Yeah, it may be less interest because it's been worn down by the infighting. Flip a coin, call for a consensus, and move it forward. I think it's a worthwhile document. It's a shame that it's going to get wrapped around the axle over this one discussion of what is or is not an attack, or how to describe that attack. Cut the whole thing out then. I don't care, but yes, I'd like to see it published. I can lose at this point. You know, it's only those who have egos involved in this fight.
We'll take it back. Paul and I will discuss it after the meeting, and then take it back out to the mailing list. You know what we've decided to do.
Okay, then just a summary on some of the items that haven't really seen much much progress. It's the gossip, CT gossip, the client behavior, and the binaries. I think it would be good if we see more work going that way, that's just a new working group will be started up or above started up and do that work there. I don't think we need to remain open for it because the progress is really slow at this point.
I don't know if anybody else has seen this, but the NTIA is sponsoring a workshop soon on software module transparency. And it seems like, you know, if there's interest in them, you know, specifying something, it may cover the binaries.
And similar for the DNSSEC transparency, I did a draft PowerBind, which I've presented at the DNS Ops, and you can have a look at it there. But I also don't think we need to keep the working group open for this, specifically also because it would probably not reuse much of the certificate transparency format, so it would be something fairly new anyway. So I think that can also find its a new way into the IETF. Okay, so then who wants to fill up 10 minutes with interesting discussion before Iker shows up?
Ben Schwartz. I'm very interested in the possible interaction between redaction and IP certificates. I wonder if anybody's considered that specific case.
Sorry, yeah, you're right. Actually, I skipped one item. It's the redaction. The redaction has come back and forth to the working group like 3 or 4 times now, and again, I think we should just if there's an interest in there, we should really have those people that are driving it to start above and maybe working group, because they've come here and vanished on a number of occasions. So I think that should just be split off from this working group. I'm not sure from Linda.
Yeah, I basically agree. The folks at I mean, this is a sort of a browser vendor kind of imposing their view of the world, no offense, but Chrome has proposed a mechanism that sort of addresses kind of indirectly redaction through the use of basically enterprise, an enterprise namespace defined in Chrome to permit stuff that won't get logged at all, rather than stuff that has the label edited. And that doesn't really address your use case in the slightest. So maybe the Chrome folks could say something about that.
Tim Halvik. The lack of interest is actually entirely due to lack of interest from the browsers. There are a lot of people who remain interested in redaction, and I think the fair summary is that none of the current methods work particularly well. So, but there also is, until we get the Chrome folks were very early on this, and everybody else has been just starting to come up with their own CT policies. And so I would encourage people who think redaction is important to continue having discussions with the root programs about their root policies. If we can get a root program interested in discussing a concrete proposal, then we can start discussing it again. But yeah, I don't think this working group has to hang around just for people to come back and do that.
We have 8 more minutes.
Yes, actually, if you want to say more about your use case, you know, the question of redacting IP addresses.
Sure. So this isn't exactly my area, but it seems to me that that IP certificates have very different security properties from the perspective of a client who's establishing a connection. In particular, there are fewer intermediaries. In some sense, the client validates the location of validates the name by its routability, depending on your perspective. So I think I'm a little concerned personally about essentially creating a system where any IP, where we end up with an enumeration of all of the IP addresses that have ever requested an IP certificate. That seems unfortunate to me. I guess I agree that this doesn't need to hold the working group open. I mostly wanted to come and see if anybody else is interested in talking about these things, maybe outside the group. I also would like to see the binary transparency work proceed. My group is very interested in binary transparency in something like a JavaScript context with maybe a browser extension. So again, if anybody wants to talk about that outside the group, please let me know.
So on the questions of IPs, IP certificates are weird and actually quite rare. Enumeration of the IPs that have IP certificates is a little bit less dangerous because they have to be public IPs anyway. And the information that you're leaking is that a certain IPv4 address has had a HTTPS certificate at one particular point in time. That's perhaps not the most sensitive piece of information in the universe. The IP certificates have a lot of interesting problems that are being actively discussed just because of the fact that, as you mentioned, the security properties are very different, and the lifetimes of static IPs are often very different and much less stable than DNS names. And in particular, they get farmed out to various entities on a regular basis, sometimes very quickly. So there's a reasonable position that perhaps they shouldn't exist, and the validation rules for them is kind of being actively discussed as something we will either clean up or we will just eliminate this. I think we might be one of 2 companies in the entire world that actually issue IP certificates on a regular basis.
But just to be clear, there's no additional requirements on 6962 bits for any of this, right?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, they look just exactly the same for the purposes of trans. Yeah, there's.
Well, they're being logged right now, right?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, actually. In many cases, actually, IP certificates are more commonly used in non-browser use cases, even if they're issued off of publicly trusted routes, just because of the fact that they're used in server-to-server and IoT use cases, where the trust store generally is the same as the trust store that was stolen from some root program. So they have to be publicly trusted. But there probably are people using IP certificates with browsers. I think captive portals would be the most likely use case.
This is Devin from Google Chrome again. Trying to wrap my head around the point that you brought up about the enumerating IP. You said enumerating IP is concerning. I'm not sure I understand why it's concerning. Is it possible if we still have, I think we still have some time.
Sure. So I don't want to take up lots of working group time if this is outside the group, but this is Ben Schwartz. My use cases generally are about services operated by clients that they want to be able to use securely from a browser, but whose existence they want to be confidential because otherwise those services could be subject to various kinds of attacks, such as, for example, a DDoS attack. So if the certificates are logged publicly, then it makes it potentially much easier for an adversary to discover the existence of the service and mount an attack against it. In IPv4, I agree that you can essentially enumerate the IPv4 space. You can ZMAP for the existence of these certificates, but in IPv6, that's at least not so clear that that's possible. So personally, for my use cases, it would be nice if browsers would take IPv6, IPv6 IP certificates and not require them to be fully enumerated in the certificate transparency logs.
Well, and that's complicated too, right? Because one of the goals of certificate transparency is we wanted to know who is issuing what so that we could pay attention to naughty practices. And the dark little corners of validation is exactly where the naughty practices tend to be. So I personally find a lot of value in logging these. I think you're right that there's IPv6 is a spot where you could hide if you wanted to. But I'm not sure how to sort of weigh the benefits. And I think the world is moving to a place where a lot of the redaction stuff, people thought they were doing a better job of hiding than they were, and Symantec, for example, had an option of please don't log my CT certificate, and it was rather popular. Most of them ended up getting logged by Google anyway. So whether they were actually getting what they wanted is a little bit questionable. So I think I would suggest to people that if you have a public IPv6 address and your security is based on the fact that nobody knows your public IPv6 address, you should perhaps revisit your threat assumptions.
This is Devin from Chrome again. Yeah, I think one of the things that we saw sort of anecdotally was looking through logs, and this is in the context of finding certificates with like maybe malformed SCTs in it, right? So we're doing a big analysis trying to help CAs get up to speed with that. And one of the most common responses we got was like sheer surprise that these were publicly known. Right? Like these things were, that they're like, these are behind lockdown intranets. And we're like, no, this was crawled and put in here. And it's not just by Google crawler, right? There's tons of white hat security researchers who do these things at scale. And yes, currently, mathematically, IPv6 is so much harder, right? Just as an aside for that. But echoing Tim, I think any model that relies on those things not being discoverable for long, it may not be like a model you want to build a foundation on. Sort of not addressing your concern, but sort of the rationale for your concern.
Right, so we do have several working groups. Hi. Once we're finished discussing ECRS items, we can talk a little bit about what's going to happen to stuff that would be orphaned if we shut down.
Okay. Hi, thanks for coming, Edgar. So we briefly had your items from the AD review, which you can see at the bottom of the slide. And so we were just wondering about your updated views on those items. So there seems to be no contention about changing the document status to experimental, so that one's resolved. The remove tracking, preventing tracking clients claim, there's still some disagreement about whether it should be removed completely or revised. So what is your view on that?
Sure. I mean, that's a working decision. So I think my position, I think, is that I think what I was trying, what I was trying to get at is like that maybe you could pull a PR up, but my understanding is when I read it was that when you say we want to do deterministic signatures, like that there's this thing that says don't do deterministic signatures, and yet simultaneously the IETF is pushing people who use RSA towards PSS, and so those seem to be in conflict. And so and I understood, and so as I took the mailing list traffic to be that there was some question about how to manage that. In particular, I can't remember who it was, probably Air said that you could deal with this by storing the signature somewhere, and then Lori said that wasn't practical, and I guess I think all it's just an easy working decision how to proceed, and a working decision could proceed we deliberately decided that we think PSS is stupid and we don't want people to do PSS and we want to do PSS 1.15, or it could be we're going to remove this text, or it could be we're gonna like, we're gonna say, well, you have to store the signatures. But it's like I just think these things I just think some of the things in tension, and you guys need to figure out how to resolve them. So I'm like not pressing for any particular resolution, but I just think that something's got to give in terms of that triangle. So I don't know if that helps. I didn't really understand like my read of the mail on this was frankly pretty inconclusive. But I think any resolution that the chairs are willing to stand behind, I'm willing to stand behind.
Okay. And then the next item was to remove no security implications.
Yeah, can you pull it up? I read it myself the other day, but I have to admit I'm a little rusty on it. Because I'm trying what this is about again. Maybe the forget.
Right, while there are no security implications to allow the accepting of submission that does not change one of its accepted trust anchors, doing so would put additional on it, et cetera.
This is fine with me. If there are no objections to this, I'm fine with that. But I guess I'm reading. So, okay, well, hang on a second. It's moved. Yeah. Okay. That's right. What was my complaint about this? I don't remember now. Are we able to find that?
Not quickly. I think you actually wanted to remove it, and there was some pushback on not removing it. But I guess
It does seem like what most likely happened, given that otherwise, what am I complaining about?
This is actually from Andrea.
Well, I think he objected to removing it. I think Ecker suggested removing it, and then.
And now I'm confused because this says you should remove it.
No,
did you put that in response? Did you put that in response to my comment, and now he objects to? And now I have to pick it back out again. Andrew, you can clear that.
All right. Hi. So Andrew Ayer here. So I think that there was some confusion about why this was in here in this. Okay. Trying to think now. Right. So it all goes back to why a log has to validate the chain to a trust anchor. And I think that originally there was a misunderstanding, which was that the only reason the log had to do this was for anti-spam, to prevent it from being spammed with certificates from, someone's, own trust anchor. So that, I think, then led to the suggestion that we say there's no, that I think that led to your suggestion that we should say that there is no security implications to requiring the check to the trust anchor because it's just anti-spam. But as I pointed out, it's not just anti-spam. It's ensuring that we can attribute every certificate in the log to some certificate authority so that browsers can take action against the certificate authority. So because of that, we do not want to put in that there is no security implication. There is a security implication. It's just not anti-spam. It's something else. Does that make sense?
This is now paging back into memory, and I agree with you. I'm happy to remove this text. I think it might be productive for somebody to add what you just said somehow, because apparently the fact that apparently several of us were confused about this suggests that maybe it'd be good, and this is a subtle point about CTs, but that'd be good to document it. But I'm fine with landing this PR.
Yeah, well, actually, I suggested some text in my email, and then Rob actually included that in his PR. So the PR will add in the explanatory text for why it's required. Wait, what's that?
296.
Yeah, if you go back to the PR, if you go over to the diff.
Files changed?
Yeah, files changed.
Right. There we go. Looks good to me. Yep, this one's fine.
All right, awesome.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for refreshing my memory.
So then.
So I think that's it, other than discussion of the documents.
Right.
Just to clarify in terms of timeline, so I'll expect a new draft from you relatively soon, and then I can AD review it and we can ship it off?
Yes.
I think I make sure that they got, double check and then we can go. Right. Thank you.
So since maybe Elisa knows a bit more about what happens to adopted working group work when the working group closes.
Alyssa Cooper. It's so it's kind of up to you. It wasn't really clear to me when you were going through if it's just that the working group doesn't want to work on these anymore, and there's individuals who would like to have things AD sponsored. It didn't really seem like that, but that's one possibility, but the other possibility is the drafts expire and that's it.
It seems mostly that the work's been really slow and that people haven't had the cycles to work on them.
Right, for example, we've got a gossip draft that there's continuing interest in it, but there hasn't been a lot of progress. It was intended for publication as an experimental standard. Can that be AD sponsored?
Sure.
It could be. I think, honestly, I'm the one holding that up. So maybe what would be better would be if we quickly try to resolve the remaining issues and then just, and then, you know, I guess I'd rather, like, when were you hoping to close, actually? Let me ask you that.
I'm sorry?
When were you hoping to close? Let me ask you that, like now?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, unless, you know, we've been discussing this for several meetings now. There's been no serious objection. And by the way, my can you AD sponsor this was a speculative question rather than a request.
Yeah, so, I mean, so technically, yes, I could, but I guess to the extent to which these are all working group documents, it'd be better to, and unless it may feel differently, and like I the guidance of the chair would be valuable here, but it might be better to just like keep the working group alive for the month or two required to land them. Is that, what do you think?
Yeah, I would certainly keep the working group open until the BIS document is through the ISG, because you never know, there could be something that comes back where you need a working group consensus call. So if you're going to do that anyway, and there's energy to just process the other document relatively quickly, then just leave it open until those two are done.
I think I can get through that pretty quickly one way or the other.
Okay. Any other business?
Hi, this is Devin from Chrome again. Sorry, and this is more of a procedural question due to lack of familiarity, so bear with me. So as I mentioned, we plan on doing some experiments to get like data to back, like, you know, because basically there are like material improvements in BIS that aren't in 6962, right? And there are things that I think are going to be very useful in the long run, but maybe not be in their final state. If the WG closes and we come up with these results half a year later, what sort of procedurally happens then? And again, it's just because I don't know.
We could potentially spin up a new working group or because this would be, what we'd be basically talking about is transitioning, ultimately transitioning something from experimental to standard. You know, potentially that, I don't know, it may be another AD sponsorship, but we could spin up another working group pretty quickly on this, I think.
Okay, yeah, and just the reason why I ask this concern is just that like these things move as glacially as changes in the PKI ecosystem do, and it seems to be a pretty big mismatch to the speed at which like IETF WGs go. It just, well, it seems that way. Sorry, Edgar's laughing right next to me. So yeah.
IETF working groups don't sort of work in an area and cover topics. We have specific pieces of work to complete.
Right.
So.
I'm mostly just amused at the concept of a process which moves so slowly that the IETF process is considered to be outpacing it at a rapid pace. I mean, so I think like that's a prefatory question. When would you think that you'd have plausible like feedback from this process?
We're hoping to have initial feedback by 104. Right, like initials.
Right. Yeah. So I guess what I would say is there are really two possible, like, forget the procedure, the two possible like outcomes here, right? One is that like we think 6962 this is essentially correct, and in which case like we could simply rebadge it as standard, as preferred standard, or issue like an AD sponsored small thing with some small corrections. The second is we think it's not substantially correct and like more work needs to be done, in which case we want to have a working group in order to do the work. Given the time frame you're telling me, I think I'd prefer to close this working group and then spin up a new one rather than put the working group on ice for like a year or two. So I think what we do is we just basically spin up, a trans 2. And maybe you can even call it trans, unless you can tell me. I don't know if there's like these things get like, trans -02 or something. To do that. But I think that'd be the process. But again, it really depends on what the feedback is. If the feedback is basically right, then like just promoting it is easy. If the feedback is that you need a lot of work, then like we have to do that work somewhere.
Yeah, this is Tim. I think I agree with that. I think actually the document is I don't know what you guys are thinking about proposing. We probably will actually have proposed improvements before you do if you're not going to do anything until 104. But most of the things that we're thinking are basically augmenting trends with new ideas and different features and things like that. And I think those are better handled as new drafts as opposed to a bis. And so those can just go through the normal IETF process and, hey, we've got a new draft. It's got great new trends stuff. There's nowhere it can currently go. Please tell us where you want to send it. So I think the existing process will work fine, even if this group closes.
There's a bunch of other groups where you close the group, but you keep the list. And this seems like a good candidate if you follow this process.
Okay, has everybody signed the blue sheets? And other than that, I guess we're done. See you on the mailing list. I gather we didn't have a minute taken? No. I'll go through the, I mean, this is a short one. I'll go through the recording and turn it into minutes. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, by the way, I'm really ready.
Almost there. Yeah.